ABC Pilbara.
This is Kelly Gudgeon. Now we're talking.
I wonder, would you know the warning signs for you or for someone else having a stroke? For someone experiencing a stroke, the faster they can access treatment, the better their recovery outcomes. But in regional and remote Western Australia, access to fast treatment might still be too long. But there has been research happening right here in WA to develop a new treatment drug that it's hoped will be able to be administered in an ambulance. And the hope is that it will change the rates of impact, especially in regional areas. Dr. Liz Dallimore is a neuroscientist and the CEO of Argenica Therapeutics, which is undertaking the research. And I caught up with her. I started by asking her about what the situation is like for people who experience a stroke in regional and remote areas.
Someone that suffers a stroke in a regional area, it obviously can be quite terrifying. Very similar to metro areas, a loved one that's nearby would call an ambulance as soon as possible and take that patient to the nearest regional hospital. The challenge with patients in regional areas is often if they're having a larger stroke caused by a clot in a large blood vessel in the brain, is that they will actually need to travel to a stroke care unit. And unfortunately, in many regional areas in Australia, those hospitals do not have the capabilities, the personnel, the equipment needed to actually remove that clot. So that patient will have to travel, usually by Royal Flying Doctors, into a metro area. So if we're talking about in Western Australia, if someone has had a massive stroke in Broome, they will need to travel down to Sir Charles Gardner Hospital to have that clot removed. So it's quite terrifying because what we know about stroke is that around 1.9 million brain cells are dying every minute. Time is absolutely critical for these stroke patients. So unfortunately, we know that only around 35% of patients in regional areas do receive that stroke unit care compared to around 85% of patients in the metro area. So there is quite a gap in terms of the care received for patients in regional areas.
Let's take it back a little bit further than that even, like some of the warning signs that we should be looking out for. Do people even know what a stroke looks like if somebody's having one?
Well, the Stroke Foundation does fantastic work around trying to educate people, in terms of what the actual warning signs are. So I hope that most people know what those sort of typical warning signs are for a stroke. Looking at, obviously, paralysis in the face. Often one of the first signs is a patient's inability to speak or muddled sort of speech. So we often say, there's the FAST kind of education that the Stroke Foundation does really well. So looking at the face, is there weakness or drooping on one side of the face? Often, you can ask someone to try to smile if they're having a difficulty smiling or you see that drooping on one side of the face. That's a very telltale sign. As I said before, slurred speech. Looking at getting them to raise their arms is another one if they're having trouble on one side of their body to raise their arm. So we say FAST is face, arms, speech, and then time. If you're seeing those telltale signs of the stroke, really time is critical, so call an ambulance as soon as possible.
Now, the ambulance is a big focus of the research that you're doing. So talk about that research, what you're working on, and how the ambulance can actually be a key part of this treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. So our research is really addressing what's known as ischemic strokes. So in Australia, they make up the majority of strokes, around 85% of all strokes. And these are strokes that are caused by a clot in a blood vessel in the brain and obviously come on very quickly. So once that clot is lodged, you get those telltale signs of the stroke coming on really quickly. So once that ambulance arrives, unfortunately there's very little that the paramedic can do at this, in current sort of standard of care treatment. So the aim is to get that patient into that stroke care unit, those specialist units where they can remove that clot as soon as possible. The reason that the paramedic can't really do much at this stage of current standard of care treatment is because they won't know what sort of stroke the patient's having. So I mentioned ischemic stroke is the most common type of stroke. Patients could also be suffering a hemorrhagic stroke, which is a bleed on the brain. And so the treatment is quite different for those two patients. So it's really important that the patient has a brain scan to really understand the type of stroke. But in all that sort of delay, especially for regional patients, getting them into those stroke care units to get that imaging and get the treatment they need, we're getting that sort of significant brain injury, brain cell death happening. So what our research is really focusing on is, could we deliver a drug in the ambulance which essentially halts that brain cell death, sort of stops it in its tracks and hibernates brain cells, so it really buys that patient time to get into those stroke care units and get that clot removed whilst protecting brain. And what's really exciting about this drug and this line of research is that it can be given to patients regardless of the type of stroke that they're having. So we don't need imaging for our drug to be delivered to patients, which is really exciting. So this drug in particular for regional patients would be an absolute game changer.
It's in trial phase at the moment, and those trials are being done obviously in city hospitals, including in Western Australia. Is there going to be some research carried out in regional areas to just see what sort of impact it can have?
Yeah, look, so we're in what's known as a phase 2 clinical trial. So the first phase of the clinical trial, we tested the drug in healthy people to make sure that it was safe. Now we're testing the drug in patients that are presenting to emergency departments across Australia, as you said, in metro hospitals, again, really to show that it's safe. So first and foremost, we need to show that the drug is safe. And so we did have to do that in stroke care units where all the facilities were available, just in case there was something that potentially went wrong. So once we've got that tick of approval of safety, it will allow us in the next stage of the trials to look at the possibility of delivering the drug in regional hospitals and really understanding how much better the drug could potentially work delivering it earlier and with a bigger time delay in terms of that treatment received in those stroke care units. So absolutely, this trial is very much about safety, but once we tick that box and show that the drug is safe to deliver in stroke patients, it gives us that opportunity to expand the trial into those regional areas.
How far away is the treatment realistically?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. The research, drug development research does take a very, very long time, especially drugs that target the brain and in neurology, because we do have around making sure that the drug is very safe, it does no harm, that it really is working on improving the outcomes of patients. So the drug has been in what we call preclinical research at the Perrin Neuroscience Research Institute here in Perth under the stewardship of Professor Bruno Maloney. So that's been a decade of love to kind of get it into the clinic. Now we're kind of approaching the end of the phase 2 clinical trial, and we will be looking at starting a phase 3 clinical trial in 2026. That trial could potentially, that will be a global trial, so we'll have to set up sites globally, but it could potentially go reasonably quickly. So once that trial's started, we could look at seeking approval for that drug within a couple of years. So not too far off. I'd like to say sort of within 5 years, hopefully this drug is on the market and available to everyone, not only in metro areas, but regional areas as well.
Dr. Liz Dallimore, she's the CEO of Argenica Therapeutics, talking about that research into a stroke treatment drug which could have a big impact for regional stroke patients. Now we are coming up to 8 o'clock.